So in this video I worked on a Scania P360. It's a 5 series. It came to me with an emissions light on, emissions high, in D rate, so engine power limited, all the rest of it, so pretty unusable, and it appeared to have overheated to me when I managed to get the cab tilted. So obviously I'm looking through the fault codes on STP3, and it looks as if it's trying to tell you that there's a problem with the coolant temperature sensor on T33, which was an active fault. It wasn't going away. I looked at diagnostics and everything, and the temperature was actually quite consistent with what was going on. So I decided to look into it a bit further, as I couldn't clear the code. I got it back working again, staying cool again and all the rest of it. What appeared to me to be back cool, working again. And in terms of mechanically, the coolant system, and I couldn't clear the code. I did a bit of reading, and it turns out as this sort of era of engine, if you like, or Scania, because it has an EGR cooler and EGR, the coolant temperature itself heavily affects the EGR. It does anyway in any vehicle when you have exhaust gas recirculation. A lot of vehicles have EGR coolers these days to try and reduce the NOx, and obviously as it knows that, it reduces the power and puts the fault on. To clear the fault, you need to run this EGR circuit test. So in this video I'm going to do that. I'm going to run the circuit test, and that's the only way for it doing a self-test and proving to itself that it works, that you can clear the fault, turns it from active to inactive. It does allude to this on the right hand side with that write up to describe the function of the sensor and what causes the faults and what have you. So it's it's quite a logical thing, really. It has to test itself to prove that it's working, because it doesn't actually have many sensors outside of the normal running of this engine. It's quite nice in a way. Doesn't have anything else to really tell it what the emissions are doing. So to prove the function of everything to itself, you have to put it through the self-test, and as a function of in the functions menu, and when you run the circuit test, it will go through it and sort of clear the codes for you. So it's quite a handy feature. Of course, one thing I would recommend is that if you've got any actual mechanical problems with the truck, they need to be repaired, fixed before you run it through this test, or you're basically just going to continuously be trying to clear the code even if it passes. So I would recommend that you get everything fixed and working first. It goes without saying. You can hear the turbo starting to whistle a bit as it's being brought in. You can see the charge air pressure changing, and the turbine speed, so it measures the speed of the turbo on this truck. And when it first fired up, it was about 30,000 RPM, and now it's around the 50,000 RPM mark. It will run at 1500 RPM, go through the warm-up check. Pay attention to the status. That gives you an idea of time and how things are getting on. But yeah, now it's brought the turbo in as a bit of boost. It'll be comparing with the boost. Now you see more airflow, which is being measured on the airflow meter. As time goes on, it'll warm the engine up, then it'll decide where it wants to go to the next step. which is to bring the RPM back down to 500 idle, and it'll step it back up to 2200. Gradually. It doesn't do it all in one go, it does it gradually. It's not as harsh as it sounds. The harshest bit of it is this warm up, which is 1500 RPM, probably about 20 or 30 minutes it'll do. It will get near 100 degrees. Don't be too alarmed, but it will get near that. You just have to ride it out. It's just the way it is. It gives you all the status, the exhaust gas pressure and everything else. You know, the way that all the bars are set up, at least you know everything's sort of in the nominal sort of points. You know if something's off, but I gather if figures are off, it doesn't actually let it run properly. It will abandon the test, but I haven't tested that to fully. Obviously, one of the parts of the test, it will bring the EGR in. So at the minute it's 0, there's no EGR at all. All it does is doing a warm up, and we get to 70 degrees onwards. I say it will get near 100 before it actually starts to do anything with the EGR, and that'll be sort of in 20 minutes in or so. And you'll still start to see the EGR brought in. You'll hear the air going, so it's switched by air, and you'll see the position of the EGR change. And you know, you'll hear a few bits of air go, and you'll hear the EGR valve be brought in. And yeah, then it'll start doing its checks, and obviously it compares all this airflow and all the rest of it, and it'll tell you if it likes the results, and it'll give you the results to kind of analyse as well, because that's up to you to analyse, to decide if it's right, even if it passes. The good thing is, if it passes, you should be able to clear the codes down. So yeah. See the temperature's getting up there now. It's still running through the first check. Still running at 1500 RPM. So yeah, it's still running at 1500 RPM, and it has been running for about 20. I guess that's about 23 minutes. Yeah, since I started. So it was about 40 degrees. I'd already run the engine when I started, and it's 97.5 now. Coolant temperature, brand new coolant temperature sensor on there. You can see there's a little bit more from the turbo. It was midway through, well, earlier through the check it was about 50,000 RPM, and now it's 55,000 RPM. It's definitely more of a whistle from it. A little bit more charge air pressure. But yeah, still running. It will run like this, and then it will just start, it'll sort of test the EGR, then it will bring the RPM down to 500, or it will just bring it down to 500 and then start doing the EGR, whatever. I can't remember which way round it was. I'll record it. Something else bearing in mind, I'm actually doing this on a hot day, so I'd imagine things warm a little bit quicker, and it's probably might be a little bit more dodgy to do that on a truck that you know it's got coolant issues or anything like that, so just be wary of that. I'm doing this outside on a hot day. It's actually the evening now, about 7 o'clock in the, well, nearly 8 o'clock in the evening, so it's just worth bearing in mind that if it's in hotter conditions, it might be a little bit more stress, although the coolant temperature does get up there anyway. You know, you're certainly not doing this test cold on the engine. It, you know, it's currently up to 100 102. So the fan's being run. The fan will be surged on and off a few times, so you can't really hear that on here, but the fan will be surged on and off a few times. But just say it's climbing above 100 degrees coolant temperature. Bear in mind the sensor is right in the side of the engine, but that's what it's doing. And it'll do this, you know, it's what I'm guessing that's 28 minutes in. It's about right from when I started, and it'll probably get up to about 105, something like that, coolant temperature, and all of a sudden it will start to do different things, and then it will be doing the next part of the check. Okay, it's bringing that fan in a bit more regularly now, so we're 106 degrees now. And most things you'd be sort of starting to sweat a bit. You think, you know, we're getting past, you know, getting near that 110 mark. That used to be regarded as being quite hot for an engine. Anyway, so the fan's brought in and out every couple of seconds now. There you go, 107 degrees. Last time at this sort of time it wasn't long before it did other things. So well, it did the next part of the check basically. So we'll see what happens there. (108 degrees now. We're getting on for nearly 110 degrees. We're not far off coolant temperature. You'll find the cap holds this and everything. So the first time I did it, I actually did work on the coolant system as well, and it was all holding together. So yeah, hopefully it should be okay. Just trying to film this so to capture it as transition into the next part of the check, hopefully. One thing worth doing as well, it does measure things like airflow and that. Use the air mass meter as part of this check. One thing I would do is make sure your air filter's clean and all your pipe works on properly. Apparently it will fail the check if there's too much airflow, not enough airflow, etc. There you go. Brought the RPM down to, you know, idle basically around 500. Steps it up slightly there, 600, 700. Yeah, you'll see it move on the rev counter as well. I'll try and focus the camera. You'll see it stepping up. It's all doing that itself. I'm not doing that. Okay, so it reached about 109 degrees coolant temperature, and it's stepping things up. In a minute, it's going to bring the EGR in. So it didn't bring the EGR in basically until it starts doing this check, which is the next part of the check. So it doesn't do it before. So here we go. We're 36 minutes in there. So this wasn't a stone cold engine. Bear in mind, it says it takes up to 45 minutes. This test, approximately 45 minutes. It says there, but it does actually. I think it took about 45-50 minutes. I can't remember when I did it last. I got some of the last bits on camera, I think. More pictures because I had the phone was flat and I was just desperate to clear the code. But yeah, this will step up in a minute up to 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 and 2,200 pretty much. It'll just keep stepping up. There you go, it's ramping up past 1,000 RPM now. You can just see it ramping up, hear it ramping up, see it moving up. Hopefully you'll see a bit of EGR activity in a second. You can see all the different figures moving with it as it's bringing you know, a bit of turbo with it. So the temperature's staying there around 109. Nothing too bad. You start to sweat a bit, of course, because in a minute it's going to rev even harder. So don't worry, it doesn't do it too aggressively. It's just, it gradually brings itself north of 1500, like it's ramping up now. Yeah, so we're going up past 12. Gets more and more up to 1500. Yeah, it's not too aggressive, it's not too bad. Okay, again, we're getting temperatures going above 109. So first time I did this, I was sweating a bit, so I thought this thing's getting hotter and hotter. Bear in mind, I was looking at a coolant fault before this, so I thought, bloody hell, is it still overheating? But you know, I'd just be patient with it. Okay, for all those of you worrying, it's actually bringing the fan in every, you know, well, it's just bringing it in when it needs to, basically. So going up above 1500. Okay, and it will keep stepping this up to about 2000, 2200, something like that. You know, and it'll just sort of hang around 2200 for a few seconds and come back down. Right, it's coming back up more and more now. It's revving on its own. I'm not doing any of that. Yeah, you don't know if you can just sort of feel or hear that rumble. That's the fan being brought in. It's been brought in more regularly now. So I think it's about 111 or just over 110 that's bringing that on. So it's just mainly maintaining itself there. We're at 1700 RPM now. Still going up. And still scale a little bit more. It'll bring itself to about 18 or 19 in a minute. There you go, 18. Fan's coming in more regularly, it's keeping itself around 110, 111 degrees cooling temperature. So I don't sweat too much. If everything's working properly, it should keep itself cool. Well, at temperature, I wouldn't describe that as cool. And right, you see the turbo working a bit now as well, 89,000 RPM. Okay, bring it up to 1900 RPM now. 1900 and a half, and now it'll bring it through to 2000 RPM. The fan's coming in every second or so now. Keep itself at temperature. 111 is a magic marker for this test. Coolant temperature. You see all the different activity on things like the airflow and what have you. There you go. It's brought itself off now. And you can see EGR activity down the bottom. Yeah. You can hear the pss of the old air. Requested position of the EGR valve, and it is doing things. You can hear it moving the EGR valve. So, and of course it's looking for differences of airflow. You know, it's at around 1000 RPM, and obviously all the different things working, it's looking for differences of airflow and all the rest of it to confirm that the EGR is working, pressures and what have you. Yeah. So there you go. It's sort of dutying it now. Bear in mind the EGR on these engines is switched by air. It's not an electronic device. It's not a vacuum device. It's something that's switched by the air pressure system. So there's a valve block that switches it. Okay, you see the coolant temperature's come down there now a bit. It's actually running the fan now. It's 100 degrees, 101 degrees. Yeah, the fan's running now. The fan's off now. Brought the fan back on. It's about 100 degrees, so that's fine. It's dutying the EGR. Yeah, so hopefully, like the last time, this is going to pass, hopefully. So I think I was talking rubbish there, or bollocks. I think this is a percentage basically of completion, because obviously that's gone to 95 now, and obviously we're not 95 minutes in, so I was talking rubbish about the minutes. That's the percentage of completion, I think. So there you go, doing all sorts of different things now, I think. But there you go, it's still dutying on the EGR. You can hear it, you can hear the air going on it. There you go, brought it back down to idle. And I guess that's 100% or complete. This check has been completed. A check will be made to ensure that the fault codes have become inactive. So let's hope that's the case. So the check has been successful, it says at the top. So you can assume that means it's passed. So now we want to clear the faults. So click through that. Yeah. Okay. The check was not successful, and the fault codes are still there. Note, this procedure is a short-term solution to temporarily deactivate the fault codes. If the fault codes cannot be found and rectified before the engine control unit carries out self-diagnostics, the faults will become active again. The reason for that is if the engine overheats again, the fault will come on again, because that's what, the high temperature is what brought it on, essentially. So that's fine. Always read these things. They do give you a good bit of insight if something isn't working. They do, to reset the control unit, stop the engine. Yeah, I didn't read this last time. Stop the engine, wait 5 seconds, turn the key to the start position. Do not start the engine. Wait until all the control units are restarted, select the function, and then continue. So there you go. Last time I tried to rush it, so that's good. So I selected yes to erase all the fault codes. So I'm going to take its advice at this stage, because last time I clicked next and I hadn't actually stopped the engine. So I'm going to do it at this stage. I should have read the whole thing. It pays to read these things. You try and shortcut it, it won't work. Yeah, because you've skipped a step, and then you kind of create a bit of a model for it, and you don't know if it's worked or not. Last time it didn't work, it didn't clear the code, but it looked to me like it had reset everything. So, sorry, it looked to me like it had passed the test, but it couldn't reset the codes. So, yeah, I don't really know why it didn't work, but it's obviously because I tried to shortcut the process by leaving the engine running, because I was an idiot. But what I should have done is read down on the menu, and you can hear the EGR sort of doing stuff now. Yeah, what I should have done is read down on that, this menu here, and that would have told me to do that, wouldn't it? So, wait 5 seconds and all that. Right, turn ignition off, just turned it back on again. Okay, now hopefully this is going to do what it says it's going to do. So I'm always very careful with my button presses at this stage, so I'm going to be a bit careful. So it says wait for all the systems to come back on, it says on those guidelines, isn't it? Or they're restarted. So next, the vehicle must be stationary with the engine off, the parking brake must be on, parking brake must be applied, and the ignition on. During the reset, all other systems may generate fault codes for loss of communication with the engine control unit. This is normal, and the fault codes can be cleared. Press next to reset the engine control unit. Okay, parking brake applied, ignition is on, we're not doing anything else. Next. Okay, now let it do its thing. I've just heard some air there. There's some faults there, mobiliser inactive, all the rest of it. Now let's hope that tachograph fault's on, obviously, because there isn't a card in it. So some weird things coming up there. That ABS fault seems to come on when I plug into the vehicle, but I guess that's because it's been interrogated. So the engine, see, I didn't turn the ignition off, didn't turn the engine off last time and turn the ignition on, so it didn't clear. So this is obviously why it's done more than last time, because it's cleared those faults off. So we're laughing there, hopefully. Engine control unit reset is completed. The underlying cause of the fault is not affected. The engine control unit can therefore indicate the same fault codes again. Just said that if the engine continues to overheat, you're only treating the symptoms here. You're getting rid of the fault code. If you haven't, I've actually looked at this, and I've looked at the coolant system. The stat didn't appear to be working, and someone had a hose blown, and they hadn't bled it up properly. They've been running it with a bad water leak for ages, and not really bleeding it up or anything, just pouring water in the header tank, not really checking whether there's enough coolant in it. I say water because water's been going in it, not coolant, which is not a good thing for these engines either, but at the end of the day they had to do what they had to do. These things hold a lot of coolant, so they were just pouring water in there and not really checking whether it's bled, and getting back in and driving it again, and it was overheating again, only getting up to about 100 degrees, but it's enough, and it was obviously on load, well, more than that, I think it's about 110. It was obviously seeing itself overheating and derated, went into derate. With it overheating, obviously the NOx is affected, and that's what it's most bothered about. You're basically, you've raised the NOx level, because the EGR cooler won't be as effective, because the EGR has an EGR cooler, and the whole idea of that cooler is exchanging temperature with the coolant temperature, and bringing the temperature of the exhaust gas down and the NOx down. So that's what it obviously cares about. But anyway, it's if you don't fix the problems with the coolant system, obviously it'll keep coming back on. You'll have to run that check again, and you'll basically be wasting your time. So just make sure you fix everything. One thing that was leaking on here was the rubber coupling between the rear sort of elbow and the EGR cooler. That's quite a common fault. It rusts inside the elbow. I stuck a bit of gunk in it. I will put a new elbow in it, but that's fixed it, and well, yeah, you can keep a bit of coolant in it now, and hopefully not overheat, and that and that derate will stay off. Another thing, note this where the gauge is. The gauge will. So right, okay. One thing you'll notice after this check is done, when the light came on originally, you would have noticed that the temperature gauge would have gone off, the coolant temperature, and just would have read 0. Reason for that is that because it obtains the information, the dash obtains this information from the ECU, the engine ECU, and that's its gospel sort of temperature reading. So basically, as soon as that's not coming through anymore, it can't trust it, even if it is coming through, or it's overheated and it's got a fault to do with that. It no longer trusts it, so that when it brings up a fault with the coolant temperature sensor, even if it's getting a good reading, it doesn't trust it if it's overheated, is what I'm trying to get at. It just turns the gauge off, and you're probably thinking, is it a problem with the dash? Is it a problem with the ECU? Is it a problem with the sensor? I've changed the sensor for good measure, because you know what these things are like. You think, oh, it's not the sensor, overheated, and you end up messing around a lot and changing things anyway. It's hardwired, so you have to splice it in. But that's just how it is. You can make a neat job of it. They give you all the kit to make a neat job of it, so don't worry about that. But yeah, it's you'll notice now that the gauge works. I've let it run off for a bit, because it obviously got over 90 degrees and the gauge was showing just over half. It's just under half now. I've actually, a handy feature of this software is you can actually program the fan to come in 10 degrees sooner. I've actually programmed that. We've had some hot weather here in the UK at a minute, and these guys do run a load, so I just thought, yeah, we'll bring that on 10 degrees sooner. I know that's probably running outside of some people's standard operating procedures, but at the end of the day, it's a feature, and I've found it handy in this case. So you can set things here like the idle speed and all the rest of it. Some things that's in the adjustment section of the functions. Calibration, you can obviously calibrate things like I think the injectors and things like that, so quite handy really. Away from that, I don't like clicking things accidentally. Calibration, I'll just show you. This is on a Euro 5 truck, so it's a Series 5 Scania. 5 Series, is it? Whatever. You see all the things. You can do the basic setting and calibration of things, calibration injectors, default setting, adaptation injectors, so all the things you need to do what you do in a dealer. The basic setting of the adaptation values of the air mass flow sensor. One thing you're doing with that EGR circuit, your EGR circuit test, one of the things it's doing is verifying those adaptations of the airflow meter. But if everything isn't set properly, let's say you've got an air leak or a restriction, it's going to affect the settings that it thinks are okay when they were all adapted into the ECU. So you need to make sure you've got everything's working, serviced, and it's operating properly, otherwise it won't pass the check. I gather it just bombs out. So you need to, that's your adaptation in there when you're when it means adaptation, the EGR system, obviously you've got your airflow meter and all that, that's made for the ECU, and the ECU's been programmed to use that and all the rest of it for some of its load sensing. The adaptation basically is because you're getting all these different fluctuations of air and all the rest of it when the EGR valve is coming open and being cycled and all the rest of it. Obviously, it needs to program that into the ECU, so that's what it's doing in that calibration setting. So sometimes if you put an airflow meter on, I don't know if that's Scania's standard operating procedure, but you probably have to readapt it into the ECU, especially if things are not working quite as they are. But of course, the first thing you'd check is to make sure nothing's blocked and nothing's blocked and none of the pipe work's got a leak or it's off. So these things do have a function, a real function, but not to be used just to fix faults. Don't just go pressing buttons to fix faults. There might actually be a mechanical sort of issue with something. It's worth bearing in mind. So just to give you a rundown, I haven't used sort of any of them yet really, so I'm just sort of going off of knowledge when I've used other things. So it's quite a good bit of software really, this SDP3. No fault codes, that's what we like to see. No fault codes. There you go, we're just looking at coolant temperature, so it's about right, just below half, which would be about 90, something like that. And that's showing at 81 degrees. It's giving us a voltage read back as well. It's quite handy for diagnostics. You can look at the location, it shows the location where it is in the engine and all that. It shows you the wiring in terms of the engine management system. Remember, that is hardwired from the factory. You have to splice it to put a new one in. They give you all the bits if you buy it from Scania. I don't know about aftermarket. It's about 170 quid from Scania. I just put genuine bits on because that's how it came. Position of the EGR valve. It's the airflow meter, and obviously the intake air temperature is built into the airflow meter. And worth bearing in mind on this model. Again, gives you a sort of idea of how it's connected to the ECU. So it's a good system.